Joining us. This is Beyond Belief Sobriety, a podcast and community for people who are seeking or who have found a secular path to recovery from addictions of all kinds. And if you're new to our YouTube channel, we post all of our podcast episodes here, have been doing it for 7 years. There's like 285 episodes out there, but there's also some audio stories that have been written by people in recovery that we've put out there in audio format that you can find, and just all kinds of other information. So feel free to look around. We have guests on our podcast, and today we have a guest. Her name is Joi Andreoli, and I'm going to have her tell me if I pronounce her name right, but Andreoli, I believe. Anyway, she is the author of a great book called The Recovery Cycle, and I read this book, and I am comfortable recommending it to our listeners. The book is written really towards a person in recovery, but there's also a section where it could be used by a professional person, a clinician, a therapist, to work with somebody in recovery. So it's directed towards someone who's dealing with addiction, but there's also a space for people that are professional. So it's kind of nice that it gives you an opportunity to use the book in conjunction with a mentor or someone else that you could use with it. And then there are exercises that you can follow and examples, and it's a really, easy read. It flows really well. So I enjoyed the book quite a bit, and I think that you would too. So anyway, without any further ado, I'm going to bring Joi out and say hello to her. Hey, Joi, how you doing?
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for taking your time to spend with us. I appreciate that. Like I said, I did enjoy the book very much. There's a lot I got out of it. I've been sober for a long time and still... I still need that stuff. I still need to read this stuff. It helps me a lot. Just kind of helps me stop and think that, that's something I really need to pay attention to. But why don't we begin, Joi, if you don't mind, just by way of introduction to anyone who might not be familiar with you, if you could give us your background and the story behind the book, what inspired you to write it? And did I pronounce your last name right?
You absolutely did. It's Joi Andreoli. You got that exactly right. And so who I am, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I live in Los Angeles. I work in LA. And like you said, I'm an author of The Recovery Cycle. And I like to hike, and I like sobriety, and anything recovery I love. So that's sort of the short version. And what inspired me to write this book was, a couple of things. One is, later what I came to know is that there are a lot of people that have misconceptions about what recovery is, or they think it might be confining, or they think they've got to go to this program or do it this way or that way. And I see recovery as being much more free than that. And it's really about freedom and making and having your own choices and living the life you want, basically. But what happened is I went back to graduate school in my 40s after being sober quite a while, decided I wanted to become a marriage and family therapist. And I was in a chemical dependency class, and the instructor was drawing the addiction cycle on a whiteboard. And as I was looking at this, I thought, wow, there's a recovery cycle. And it literally, in my mind's eye, coalesced literally in front of me. And I saw it on the whiteboard. I wrote it down in my notes, and I went up to the professor right after and showed him my wonderful find. And he said, "Oh, that doesn't work." But what I know and what I knew in my heart is that it's a process, just much like the addiction cycle represents what it's like. And every addict I know can identify with each part of that. Same thing with the recovery cycle, which in a sense is the positive mirror image of the addiction cycle. If you read that part, you can see it. Mm-hmm. So the inspiration came to me after that class, not to prove my professor wrong, but more to fulfill, the desire that I had to represent recovery, the emotional journey of recovery, in a very user-friendly, visual way.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as you write about the recovery cycle, and I had kind of a similar experience when I first got sober. I was young also, and it was a long time ago. But I remember being stunned that I had this problem, and I just didn't seem to be aware of it, or I just didn't seem to be able to acknowledge it. And so I would go to the library and I'd read all these books that I could find on addiction, and just so I could figure out what was going on. And I stumbled across one that had a graph, and it was really a curve, and it started like it showed a person descending into the depths of addiction where they finally hit bottom, and then it shows them coming out on the recovery end. And I remember looking at that graph, and I was just like turning the corner. I was at that point where he admits he has a problem. It's like just now
Right.
getting better. And then I saw the rest of the progression, and it was just something that just gave me a little bit of hope that, there's another side to this. So I had that experience, and I also believe that there is certainly a cycle that we go through in our recovery. And in your book, you mentioned that there's 4 cornerstones to the recovery cycle. And I wonder if that might be a good way to approach this, or if you know of another way that you want to talk about what you've written, we can just go with that.
Sure. And by the way, I think I know the graph you're talking about. There are a lot of, yes, I do. It dips down and it comes back up. And there are a lot of things to
Yes.
understand on the way down and then coming back up. Get
Yes.
it?
Yep.
Too many to read, right? To
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah. Yeah. I was fascinated by that. Yeah, that's me going down. I'm getting there.
Yeah, but it all starts like what you're talking about. It all starts with just knowing, wow, maybe I have a problem. I think I have a problem. And people that think they have a problem, there's probably a problem.
Yep.
If you're thinking that, there probably is a problem. So how do I discuss this? I talk about 4 cornerstones or essential elements. And first, the idea of recovery. I mean, I believe it's a process of becoming an observer of my thoughts and my feelings, where my actions are progressively aligned with my values and what I hold dear.
Okay.
But I got to do that sober. I mean, people relapse. I totally get it. But if I want to progress in this way and have my behavior aligned with my ideals for myself and just my own innermost self, I need to do that sober. So I kind of state that pretty clearly in the book.
I think you like 3 or 4 times abstinence, 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 and one of the sections there is really critical. You can't really be in recovery if you're not abstinent.
Right. But I also say, because I have QR codes, if you notice, at the end of each chapter where I have a little video coming on, but I talk about also the idea that if you're even contemplating sobriety and you're falling and you keep drinking or using or whatever it is you're doing compulsively, don't give up.
Okay.
Keep reading, and like you were doing, keep gathering the information. So this idea of recovery that I have anyway, that I think the recovery cycle fulfills. And if we look at the addiction cycle, everybody can identify the preoccupation at the 12 o'clock. If we're looking at a circle, you got preoccupation, you're thinking about it. It's all you can think about. You drop on down to the rituals. What are you doing? Now I'm going to drive to the liquor store, or I'm going to, drive by the dealer's house, whatever your rituals are to get you to use, that you use, come down to the 6 o'clock, and then you're using. We know how that goes. And then come back up to feeling guilt, shame, and despair. And if you're in that place, you
Yep.
have a problem, and you can identify pretty quickly where you are. And all that drops down into isolation.
Yep.
This really awful feeling of isolation.
Yep.
So the recovery cycle, like I was talking about, being this positive side of life, basically, starts with a recovery focus. So now the preoccupation is replaced with a focus. And a focus is more deliberate than being preoccupied or distracted by something that might not be good for us, right? So we have a recovery focus. It's the first cornerstone, I would say. And maybe in the beginning, that recovery focus is just, I don't want this pain anymore.
Right.
It could be, it usually is as simple as that. How do I not live this way anymore? So, but then over time, as you know, you and I, we've been sober a long time, those things change. It's like, oh, well, maybe I want an education. Maybe I want to talk to my spouse a little better. Whatever the thing is, that like to be a little bit more emotionally sober. So if we're starting out with the recovery focus, we define what that is for ourselves. And how are we going to do that? Well, we got to find people that can help us do that. So my belief is we do that through people that have done it before, that have gone before us, to sort out how we're going to do it. But it's ultimately our choice to do. So we start out with the recovery focus, come down to recovery rituals. The rituals can be meetings. Doesn't matter. It can be 12-step. It could be any recovery program. And today there are so many options out there that I felt really, really strongly about. When I got sober, it was the 12-step program was basically it.
Right.
And that was it. So, and to me, I had a really open mind, and it worked for me because I hung out with the people that I liked. I didn't like the dogmatic ones, and I liked the people that were really open and had an open mind and non-judgmental people. I think that's really important in choosing somebody. So anyway, these recovery rituals replace the rituals of using. And within those recovery rituals, going to a meeting, calling your sober guide, whatever it is that you're doing, at least I know if I want to fulfill the dreams in my life, I've got to take some positive action or contrary action, which is the third at the 6 o'clock. Now if we're coming down, you following? Hope I'm not giving too much for the listeners. So I'll just recap: recovery, focus on top, heading down to the recovery rituals. Then we do contrary action. And contrary action is positive action or self-affirming action rather than engaging in any self-destructive behaviors. And, I've seen a lot of people in sobriety continue to do with their secondary addictions or even in their communication with others. It can be very self-destructive. So the contrary action is more positive behaviors. And we come back up to now not guilt, shame, and despair of using, but we have a range of feelings, an expanded range of feelings that we can experience through taking these positive actions. And, and these feelings can be the ability to sit through feeling embarrassed. I talk about that being like my least favorite feeling in the book is embarrassment. I do not like being embarrassed. Embarrassment, shame, good feelings. You'd be surprised. A lot of people have to desensitize to be feeling good in their lives. So now we have this expanded range of feelings that we've come to after taking this contrary action. And I believe with the tide of support with these recovery rituals, it sends us right back up to a kind of a more of a focus, positive focus on what we or I or what you want for your life in terms of your recovery. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think that there's something to having rituals, recovery rituals. I recall when I was really newly sober, there would be time before a meeting. I might have 30 minutes before a meeting or whatever. And I did not know what to do with my time. All I knew if I had extra time is I needed to go to a bar. That's what I did with my extra time.
Right.
So I had to learn, I had to develop a different ritual. I don't just go to a bar, I do something else. Like, you can actually show up to these meetings early.
Right.
And I started doing that. And then you start meeting people and so forth. So, and that became a ritual so that when I would get off work, that would be how I would unwind, and rather than going to the bar the old way, now I'm doing the new way. I see my friends at the meeting.
Well, and what you're talking about is you're meeting your friend at a meeting. And I believe that the recovery rituals need to include their, activities that include other people that are like-minded people that you like being around them and that have meaning for you. If I'm going, so there's got to be other people. Yes, you can do a recovery ritual reading spiritual literature, but I believe a lot of those rituals need to include other sober people that I like and that that have the same values or something. And there's some meaning out of it. Otherwise, it's not gonna, why would I do it if I don't like it? If I don't like the program or I don't like, it's the people in it. And so that recovery cycle where the addiction cycle drops down into isolation, the recovery cycle, really, if we live it fully and engage in it, insert ourselves into it, the whole thing, we can drop down to feeling a greater connection to, oneself, others, and maybe something greater if you believe in that, which isn't a requirement.
And that's really true. Based on my experience anyway, when I was drinking, I was very, very much isolated because I was hiding so much of myself from other people. I was hiding a large part of my life from others and myself. And I was kind of a loner. I'd drink in bars, but I wasn't connecting with anybody or anything like that. And the stark difference in recovery was all of a sudden I had I had actually people in my life I could talk to. And just by luck, I guess, I wound up at a group where there are a lot of guys my age that we were all in our 20s. We were all in our 20s, early 30s or whatever. And we bonded. And it was really the first time ever in my life that I had like really friends that I could talk about things that I never even would think about talking about, real stuff. And that was my connection, I guess. I was really getting connected, making a connection with other people by learning to be honest and open and learning about them.
Right. Shared experience. We have a common shared experience in our, pain and in our joys. And that's it. I think it's vital. I mean, I make that point too, that it's vital to have, I suggest that is having a part of the focus is having healthy, caring relationships. What was his name? Ernie Larson. He wrote a book called Stage 1 and Stage 2 Recovery. And he talks about Stage 2 recovery being, including that healthy, caring relationships. It's got to be included in that. So I really believe that too.
Yeah, you wrote about relationships quite a bit in this book.
Yeah,
and there's a whole section on it too. And I thought that was interesting because when you really think about it, that's probably the biggest challenge any of us ever have in life in general is just relationships, right? Whether it be with your spouse or people at work, and getting sober, that was probably one of my first, hurdles I had to overcome was, dealing with my family of origin, and learning how to be comfortable around them and learning how to have relationships with them as a sober person. And it was a difficult thing to navigate. And then as you get sober and you start forming other relationships, they just require work. I mean, they're just work.
There's no way around it.
There's no way around it. And which is good because it helps you. It helps us as human beings, I think,
Yeah. When I went to a recovery facility, I went to a state-run place when I first got sober. I stayed there for 3 months. And when I got there, they said, you can't talk to your family. Can't talk to your family. I think it was a month. It might've been a couple of months, but I know it was at least a month. And my mother was so mad. I was very young at the time. She was very mad. So, and I didn't share in my recovery groups for about 12 years. I was so afraid of people. I was so afraid of people. Yeah, it really took me unless I was nudged by someone or I was asked, I was so afraid of being judged. So I feel so strongly about all of us supporting each other. So when you're talking about the conditioning, I think and this isn't to blame the parents or anything, but the conditioning that we have, a lot of people have that I know in recovery, myself included, over the years, and that I build upon within my own self, that stuff that grinds away at my self-esteem, all of that conditioning. I mean, we get sober, a lot of us, and we still have that conditioning. Right. So I'm bringing that now to my relationships. People were not sources of love. So I was afraid, so I wasn't going to talk to anybody, but I did find a trustworthy person. And trustworthy is with somebody that I take a risk on, and they build a trustworthy record over time. That's what I think about trust. So getting into relationship is a huge, huge part of recovery, and not getting stuck in these dysfunctional relationships. And it takes work to unwind all that conditioning and to not make blame my drug of choice. My husband and I were talking about, we talk about blame being our drug of choice for so long. We wanted to blame each other when I felt bad and he wanted to blame me. And it's kind of great to get to a place where I recognize that And I think my book talks maybe a little bit about that. Like you said, on that section of feelings, to where I can really get in touch with how I feel, what I want and what I don't want, and then communicate that to others and the world in a rational way, and hopefully a joyful way,
right.
Ideally.
When I read that section about feelings, what got me thinking was that, even now to this day, I can be so reactive, not really stopping to pause, to think, to process, or to even identify whatever it is that I'm feeling. I never even stopped to think about that. It's just something's boiling up inside of me, and then I react. I can say there's been improvement, but that's, I guess, when I was reading your book, that's what was I was thinking about was that. And then you wrote about, how we're built in nature, that we have this instinct to either, run or fight or freeze. And that I could see that in me in different situations, reacting just that way out of some sort of an instinct. But that as a human being, I don't have to do that. I can actually stop and name whatever it is that I'm feeling. And I've heard that before, and I've read that before, and other people have talked about it. But for whatever reason, when I was reading your book, it really kind of made me think about it more. Just the next time I'm feeling something is to maybe just tell myself what I'm feeling. Is that what you would suggest?
Get out of feelings wheel. It's so funny. The feelings wheel. I just poo-pooed that for a long time. But the feelings wheel is very helpful. And because it talks about all these, you can look at it and say, oh, what am I feeling? There's some basic ones, but then there's a lot there. But yes, name it. I mean, Dan Siegel says, name it to tame it. And it's like, okay, so you see the visual. If I have a feeling, I react, think later. That's just reacting.
Yeah.
But if I have a feeling, run it through my thinking brain. What am I feeling? What am I not feeling? What do I want? What do I don't want based on that? And then I act. It's a different thing. So it's feel, think, act. I'm touching my stomach. I go up through my head. My feelings are dialyzed through my brain, in a sense, and then I can act. And by the way, the conversation becomes much different with whoever it is I'm talking to. I'm sorry for hitting the microphone, but the conversation becomes a much different conversation, and a much more loving one, an accepting one, if I'm with somebody else who's doing that. So if I'm saying, gee, you know what, I feel, doing this podcast, my husband said, I'm feeling a little disappointed. We aren't going to be able to go to our dinner at our normal time or something like that. It's different than, why did you schedule it for, that's a very different conversation. And I got to say, oh, okay. Yeah, I understand that. I've felt a little that way on my side too. And it's just a different conversation when we're talking about that. And I think it's not really addressed too much, and especially in a lot of programs, we talk about actions being, and I believe this too, our actions are very important, acting our way into right thinking and such. But anyway, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, so I'm reeling it back in.
No, I in my marriage, it's kind of interesting. My wife is not a person in recovery, and so she doesn't have a program she works, but she seems to just kind of naturally have this innate ability to not just be so reactive and so forth as I am. And one of the things that I noticed about her and me, and what I learned about myself in this, is how the environments we grew up in kind of form what is acceptable to us. So, and this paints me in a really bad light, but I for example, I grew up in a family where people just yelled and screamed. It was like all the time. It was yelling and screaming. She did not experience that. If I ever raise my voice in this house, she shuts that down as being totally inappropriate. She doesn't the first time that happened to me, I thought, wait, this is what I knew. And, it can happen. I might raise my voice. I try not to, but if I do, I kind of know where that's coming from. It's coming from how I was raised in the household I lived in. And there's that big difference. She did not have that. So good for her, but she has really kind of helped me in that she knows how to set those boundaries. She can say, no, that's not acceptable, which is something I can learn to do. But it's amazing to me that she knows to do that just naturally.
Yeah. I always am amazed at people too, that they somehow, but you know what? They don't end up in my office. Yeah. They don't end up. So I don't know a lot of who they are.
I know you don't know that.
But, impulse control is really a hallmark of sobriety. Yep. And, you mentioned being, the fight, freeze. We're animals. Mm-hmm. We're human animals, but we're still animals. So there's not going to be, it's okay to we're not going to be perfect people. I'm not going to be perfect. I thought, everybody's like, everything is always on a rational level, because those wounds, I would say, and growing up in a home like what you described, everybody yelling, that's what your modeling was. Mm-hmm. Our parents are our demonstrator models, man to man, woman to woman. They're the demonstrator models. So that's how we learn. And basically they're gods, not that, and it gets, the first 3 years, it's almost our hard drive, Yeah. So we're constantly having to do software updates. Mm-hmm. Like you said at the beginning, it's work. It's a cycle. It's a process. It's not over and done with. It's a continuous process. Right. Because the animal part of me is going to run, and I think I talk about this, about our survival is at stake. My very survival was at stake in my mind as a child at times. So I would either mostly shut up to survive, and that lasted, like I said, it lasted a long time into recovery, where I didn't really think that I had a right to be, feel, think, and share in my own way. Right. But here I am now. So yeah, that's what the recovery cycle, the process of recovery, really has done for me anyway.
Yes. I also like the idea that people can decide for themselves. They can kind of design their own program. I mean, there's some parameters you lay down, that there's some things that you might want to look at here, but you decide for yourself what you want your recovery to look like. And I think that that's a really useful thing for someone who's kind of that's new, and that might change later. But I recall, like, for me, it was, my focus was just not drinking. But if I can move to I think a place, even anybody really, if you can move away from that as your primary focus, I guess, but to have some positive goal or dream or vision of what you want your sober life to be like.
Right.
Is something that I kind of was lacking in the beginning. I just was, it took me longer than I would have wanted in hindsight to actually begin making, having goals of what I wanted to achieve in my life. So in other words, for me, I was sober for 10 years and my life was pretty much centered around being sober and with that community. And then when my father died, and I realized, gosh, there's a lot of things that I want out of my life that I'm not getting. And so I had to decide what I had to recover the dreams that I had, I guess, that I lost from my drinking. And I kind of think that I kind of got that from your book, that you can decide, what you want your life to look like, what you want your sober life to look like.
Yes. How old were you when you got sober?
Oh, I was 25. So then 10 years later, I go back to school. I start making goals to get things that I always thought I would have in life. I always thought, I'd get married, I'd have a job, I'd get a house, all this kind of stuff. Well, by the time I was 35, I was just sober, but I really wasn't achieving anything in my life. And I decided that I needed to do that. I went back to school and got degrees and got married and all that kind of stuff, which was great, which was good, but it was an exciting time for me that in hindsight, I wish I would have started it sooner.
Yeah. It's funny when I think about the word recovery, it's like the action or process of regaining control over what we've lost.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so I think that when I got sober, it was a different, because I knew that I'd wanted to go to college, but forget it.
Right.
I was 20 years, but so when I did get sober, my guide said, you stay sober a year and then talk about going back to school. Just get your sober feet. So all I knew is I wanted to go to school. I didn't have some grand vision about what I wanted to do. I mean, when I was 5, I thought I needed to straighten my family out. But so then all these years later. So yeah, I think it's really important too that we honor, the very soul of somebody, of what it is that they want in their life, rather than just, put the plug in the jug and quit drinking and get on this hamster wheel of just making. I think that recovery is central to my life, for sure. Obviously I've written a book about it, but it's totally central. It gives me everything in my life, but I always do my best to maintain a vision of what I want for myself, what I want my life to look like, the kind of person I want to be. And I want to be congruent with all of those things, with my actions being congruent with that. But having a vision is where it starts. But the other thing, it took you 10 years. I'm thinking, my question is, like, what was it for those 10 years that kept you from that? Is it because you didn't have permission? What was it?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't really have an answer for that. I think that's a good question, though. It's something I should ponder and maybe have an answer for someday. But where I was in my life, I recall my first dream for what my sober life would look like. I was in jail, waiting to see the judge for my last DUI, and I thought, man, I just don't care. I just want to be sober. I don't ever want to be in this situation again. I don't care if I just have a job pushing a broom in a little apartment somewhere. That's all I wanted. And I was really satisfied with just not getting thrown in jail anymore, basically. And that's all I really wanted out of my life. But but at the same time, though, I really started during that 10-year period, I was socializing a lot with people that I had never had that before. And so maybe I needed that, but I spent that time getting to know people, mostly guys, and socializing. And that's what I did, for that 10 years. And then there was a shock to my system, I guess, when my father died, that I had to reassess what I really wanted out of life. And I started doing that. But yeah, maybe that's what it was. I just was at that period. I just was in this comfortable zone, I guess, where I was doing fine. I had friends and I was happy, and I wasn't really thinking. I guess I thought that I'm sorry. I think that I just kind of gave up on that whole idea that I could go back to school and that I could achieve anything. I think I did give up on that idea. I did. And then when my father died, I was comparing my life to his, and I didn't like the difference. And so I decided to make some changes, but I think I kind of gave up. I gave up. Yeah.
Well, it's when I went back to school, thank you for sharing that, by the way. I really enjoyed listening to that. We give up on ourselves. And I was told my first semester in class, I wrote this story about this fantastic roommate I have. And I thought, I'm going to be a writer. I gave it to the professor, and she said, you know what? You really need some work. And what I heard was, you write awful. You should never even consider it. And so what did I do? Completely put that dream aside, right? So it's so important to listen to that. And when I went back to school, I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be able to, I'm not smart enough to get a master's or, but I did it anyway. Right. And late is great. I did it. And what I'm saying with you is identify with that.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing I want to say about what you just said was, so what do we do in life? I structure my time and I get my stroke needs met. I'm also a transactional analysis practitioner. Nobody needs to know what that is, but it's getting my strokes are a unit of recognition. that tell me I exist, and they can either be positive or negative. So it sounds to me like when I was hearing you talk, is you were structuring your time around this positive experience with these guys and how important that was for you. I don't know. But
yes.
So I like to think of like, how am I structuring my time? Because I want to structure it around positive experiences with people, positive strokes, relationships, and something that's meaningful to me as well.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, now I'd like to segue into another topic that is of interest to listeners of this particular podcast, and that's the topic of spirituality. And I'll tell you, I've been all over the map with this. Okay, so when I first, so I'm an atheist. I just realized I was an atheist, like, I don't know, years ago or whatever, and I was sober 25 years old, and I realized I'm an atheist. But at that, when I had that realization, I thought, okay, I'm still spiritual. I need to have the spiritual component to my recovery, and I need to be able to describe my recovery in spiritual terms. And I was totally comfortable with that. But then over time, I got to this point where, no, I don't need any of this mystical stuff. I'm just going to describe everything. I'm just going to use practical everyday language. And now I've come back around again. I had a conversation with a professor of philosophy who had written a book about William James. And she told me, she said that she thinks it's a shame that the humanity has been taken out of psychology, and that William James wouldn't like that, because William James, when he talked about psychology, his father's psychology, he spoke in real human terms. He spoke in language that, not clinical language. And I thought to myself, that is right. I mean,
dense language, though.
Yeah. But I thought, I think that's what really touched me when I was first hearing other people's stories, was not a clinical approach, but the real human part of it. So I'm now getting back to this side of me that says, no, I think I do need more of that spiritual, I guess, language is what I would call it.
Well, what does spirituality mean to you?
Well, that's a good question too. I think that this is what spirituality means to me. This is how I would see it now. Spirituality would be like art. It would be a way of expressing myself that's beyond just science, that's beyond just me being a mammal, that expresses my feelings in a way like an artist would. It's a different way. It's a way of communicating, is how it is to me. I don't know if I'm feeling a connection with anything, per se. Or drawing power from anything. It's more of just a feeling of appreciation and expressing and describing something as just as a human being, as someone having an experience, and not trying to understand it, but just to have a conversation about it, to not have to know why, I guess.
Why?
Does that make sense? To not have to have the scientific explanation behind it.
Right. Exactly.
to not have to worry about my dopamine or whatever it is, and just be a person.
Exactly. And I believe that's what you're talking about, is individuals, like me caring about you caring about, like me caring about me caring about you caring about you, and you caring about me. It's like this thing, to me, it's it's not religion for sure.
Right.
And people will say, oh, it's God, that people use the word God, but it's almost this shared spirit, I would say. It's a shared spirit that, but I need to develop a relationship. I need to develop this relationship with myself, my values, my action, like all of that is mixed into this idea of spirituality, where I'm for sure connecting with other people, but I can also feel it when I'm alone. But I also need other people.
Right. Yeah. When you wrote about feeling that connection with other people, it's that feeling of being safe and being safe, feeling that you're loved, being with people that understand you. And I was thinking about that from my growing up years, and I would have that like with my grandmother. When I was with my grandmother, I always felt safe, protected. There was a warm feeling of comfort with her that I never had anywhere else. But I recall having that same feeling sitting around in AA meetings of just being safe and comfortable, I guess.
Right.
That's connection.
And that's a connection. That is connection. And you got that from attendance.
Right.
I mean, first your focus was, I want to stay out of jail.
Right.
That you wanted to do that. And you found these guys.
Yeah.
And you probably just did some other things too to keep you sober.
Yeah.
And living a life that you want to. I mean, you met a wife, you have, you were doing something.
Right.
So, and again, that greater sense of connection, it's like, it comes from all of that. And that connection is, I believe, spiritual in nature. And again, I do not mean that in a religious way at all.
Right. And yeah. And I don't even get in debates anymore with that people. If you can go on Facebook groups for people in recovery.
No, you can.
Actually, I dropped out of all of them except for the one I created for this podcast. But yes, I dropped out of them all because I couldn't stand it. Why argue about recovery? There's nothing to really argue about it because it's everybody's own individual personal experience, right?
Exactly. I love that, and I love the open-mindedness that will from you and from a lot of other people. Yeah. But yes, there is that faction that have their own way, and that's fine. But I like the open-minded. We all belong. We all belong here sober, we all had a problem. So any path is fine.
Yes. I like having you on here. Anytime I have a therapist on here, I always feel like, you know what? I got a therapy session out of this podcast episode. But thank you for that. Are there any final thoughts, anything that we didn't cover that you think would be important for listeners to know that you'd like to talk about before we sign off?
I always have a ton of final thoughts, but I'll say this one thing really quickly about that spirituality. Somewhere in here, I do have a study on that in that chapter about spirituality and how it enhances well-being across the board. So there is a study that points to that. So it's not like it's, that's it. There is a study.
Right.
And I say, let's teach it in the classroom. Let's not teach religion, but let's because a lot of people are talking about spirituality. Right. Final thoughts. Let's see. Just if you're struggling, just don't give up. Don't give up. Find somebody that you feel safe with. Find somebody that has no investment in your decisions and your choices, and that supports you being you, provided, you're not hurting yourself or other people. But even if you choose to hurt yourself by drinking more, we don't have control over that. We could, find a trustworthy person that you can confide in and be honest with. And that's sort of where it all starts.
I like that. And I will put links out here where people can find your website, they can find your book. And I do encourage listeners to check this book out. I enjoyed reading it. I'll read it again. It's one of those books that you might read through once and then you might want to go back through it again. But I would kind of recommend going from beginning to end, read it, get a good idea of the book, and then figuring out what you want to do with it. But I liked it a lot. I think it would be a great book for anybody that is interested in exploring the idea of their recovery and what they want it to look like. So
regardless of what program.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't work with any it's not, because basically it's just it's a visual representation of this emotional journey that we're all going to do. So if you're going to stay sober.
Yeah. So thank you. I appreciate it, Joi. Thank you for
being
here. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.